Hello and welcome back to Refinement TV, and today we're going to be doing a how to tune your car, and this is going to be for a race tune or a grip tune, and this will primarily be for steering wheel users, although you can use the same formula for a controller. So in today's class we're going to need a pen and paper and a phone in order to be doing the calculations that we need. Now we're going to be using a formula, and that is maximum take away minimum times your weight ratio add minimum, and this is going to give you your base setting. Now I've done a Nissan 350Z up 2003 Fairlady Z. I'm not going to go through everything. You tune the car how you like it, whether you do it to certain points or wherever you like. You just tune it out to wherever you want it. Now I've put an RB26 engine in this, and there is a few tips you need to hear. Now no matter what car, if it has available drift suspension, then make sure that you fit the drift springs and dampers to your car, especially if it's rear wheel drive. Now I fit this to all cars where it's available, but with a rear wheel drive car we can still tune it to a race tuning, but it will allow you to be able to catch the back end a lot easier when you lose control. Now when you are modifying your car, keep an eye on your roll cage. Sometimes if you go to the full roll cage, it will actually make your car handle worse. And also when putting a wide body kit on, you will notice that it actually says sometimes that your handling is worse. Now that is because when you put your wide body kit on, it actually takes your tyres away, but when you have your wide body kit on, it actually gives you wider tyres, especially at the rear, which is very handy for grip tuning. Now on here we got 305s. Now when you choose your wheels, your size can also be very important to the handling characteristics of your car. Now I will not go over a 35 or a 30 profile. 30 is the very minimum I will go to. If you look, it says 295 3019. That is the lowest I will go to. I will not go to a 25 profile. You need your tyre to be able to absorb some of the road, and yes, you will feel that on your steering wheel. Now not everyone likes the Forza wing. Now you don't have to have your Forza wing, especially if you're just tuning for a fun car, but if you're tuning for racing, then I suggest you put on your Forza wings front and back. Hopefully whatever car you choose might even have a better looking wing than this, but hey ho, that's all Forza gives us, we'll have to use it. Now I have maxed this car out with the RB26 engine. It has got race tyres on. Now there's no difference between the Horizon race tyre or the normal race tyre, I just don't like the white writing on my wheels. Now I've got maximum width on front and back. I've already told you about the profile, and then just basically, depending on what you want to do, max out your tuning to whatever you want. But always make sure you put your drift suspension on if it is available. Now a few things you need to take note of before you start going into your tuning. I'm just going to save this first, and then I'll show you what you need to look at. Now for gearing, you need to come into the dyno and have a look at where your car is making its best power band. Now if we look at this dyno graph, the orange line is our power, our green line is our torque. Now our torque starts dropping off at about 7,200 RPM, just past 7, and it sort of meets our maximum power line at around about 7,500. Now as long as we stay over 6,750 with this car, I would say maybe 7,000 RPM, we're going to be in our peak power band. So just remember that for when we're doing our gears. Now if you look in the left hand side window, if you look at the front weight ratio, it says 55%. Now pen and paper, we're going to need to take a note of that. So if you've got a pen and paper now, write down maximum, take away minimum, times weight ratio, WR, add minimum equals base setting, and we're going to add 55%, and we're also going to put in 6,750 RPM, and we know that is our favoured power range. Right, so onto the tuning side of things. Now, with tyres, I find that around 27.5 PSI is going to be the best starting. I tend to find heavier cars, I will start dropping that down lower. Lighter cars, I will raise that up. Now, if you have a car that has hardly any traction at the back, you can reduce your rear down a little bit lower than your front, but just don't make it too drastic. Now, we will start from the differential and work our way over. Where you got drift suspension, it does 75% acceleration, 75% deceleration. Now, depending on what car I've got, I usually go 50% on the acceleration, and whatever the acceleration is, I will halve for the rear. Now, if you've got a four-wheel drive car, leave the balance alone, but then adjust your front down to about 30% and your rear down to about 50%. Half on the rear, zero deceleration on the front, and then tune from there. Now, aero. I'm going to leave the aero standard for now, but what I would usually do, I would put the front up to around about 85 and leave the rear alone, and then we'll adjust the rear when we're going for our test drive. Now, the formula comes in handy, and you will need a calculator or a phone in order for this. So what I mean by maximum takeaway minimum is your setting here. So maximum on rebound stiffness is 20, minimum will be 3. So that will give you 17. So we're going to do, I'm going to write this down for the first time. It's 17 times your weight ratio, and that will then give you an answer, and you add minimum back on. So our weight ratio was 55%. So we get our calculator. And we will do 17 times, and it would be 0.55 equals, and then we're going to add our minimum back on, which is 3, equals. Now our front we know is 55%, so that was times 0.55, and we're going to move that over to 12.35. Now I'm going to round that up to 12.4, we always round up. If it's below 5, we'll round down. Now, it was 55 on the front, that leaves us 45 on the back. So we're going to be doing 17 times 0.45 equals, add our minimum, which was 3, gives us 10.65. So we're going to round that up to 10.7. Now, if you Google percentage calculator, our bump stiffness is always going to be between 50 and 75% of whatever our rebound was. So I tend to do 60%, but it's personal preference, and whatever works for you, you can adjust it from there. But use 60 as a base and then go from there. So 60% of 12.4, 60%, I'll get it right in a second. 12.4 is 7.439, so it would be 7.4. 60% of 10.7, iPhones, 10.7 is 6.41, so 6.4. Now damping, by the way, maximum minimum will 9.9 times out of 10 be exactly the same. It'll always be 17, unless you've got a lorry or something like that, and they tend to be a little bit different. Some Jeeps are also a little bit different, but the majority of cars that I've found are all 17 times weight ratio. Now springs, this will always change depending on what car you've got. So we'll need our pen and paper for this one. So we'll adjust the top to max, bottom to minimum, and then we will take note of what they are. So we have 312, 62.4. So we're going to write this down. 312 take away 62.4 equals, quickly work that out, 312 take away 62.4 equals 249.6. Take a note of this, it's handy for when we do our next calculation. So we've got 249.6, that is our maximum takeaway minimum. We will times that by our weight ratio, 0.55 equals, then we'll add our minimum back on, which was 62.4 equals 19968. So we will put that in, that'll be 200. Remember, we're rounding up because it's over the 5.5. Now, we will take our 249.6 and we will times that by our rear, which was 0.45 equals, add minimum, gives us 174.72. So that would be 175. No, it won't. It will give us 174.7. Right, ride height. If you are riding on a very bumpy road, then raise your ride height up. Otherwise, if it's a nice smooth ride, keep it low. Reduce that center of gravity. Now, by raising it up, I would do 2 taps front and back. Don't tend to do no more than that. Anti-roll bars. Again, minimum, maximum. Tend to find your maximum is 65. Your minimum is 1, leaving 64. So we will do 64 times 0.55 equals, and now we're going to add 3. Now this is personal preference to me. You can add 1 usually, but I like stiff anti-roll bars. So add 3 equals 38.2. Do 64 times 0.45 equals, add 3, 31.8. So that is our anti-roll bars, springs and damping setup. Now, alignment is done by telemetry, or telemetry, however you want to say it. And I will usually start off with 1 and 0.6. Your front caster on drift suspension will always be maxed out at 7. Now, on a normal car, we'll keep that at 5. If it's a super or a hyper car, we'll put it to 6 to 6.5. Dabble with that a little bit, personal preference, but tends to be supercars and hypercars around about 6.5, 6. All normal cars keep at 5. Now your toe out makes a car turn in quicker, toe in makes a car more stable. So if you have a rear wheel drive car that is very tail happy, you've tried to tune it out, but it just will not stop spinning out from the rear, add toe into the back. Now, I don't usually go over 0.5, but on some of my drift cars I have, but this is a grip tuning video, so we'll keep to maximum of 0.5. If you have a 4-wheel drive car, a little tip, if it is not steering how you want, so it's not turning in nicely, you're not managing to get that front end to dig in and turn, what you can do is put out 0.3 on the front, out 0.3 on the rear. This will give your wheels a type of U shape, and your car will really start to dig in. Now you can raise or reduce that number depending on how you feel, but that's just a good little tip for 4-wheel drive cars. Gearing. So remember our 6,750 RPM. Now what I tend to do is I will adjust the 6th gear into the corner of that window for the final drive, and then I will do the rest of the tuning on the fly. As I said, we've done tyres 27.5, and we'll also adjust them if needed on the fly. So that's the basic tuning settings, and now we're going to go and see how the car drives. Now what I tend to do is I'll go over to the roundabout at the top of the city, and I will use our telemetry, however you say it, and I will use a guide on there to help me find our perfect camper settings. Now, all cars are different, especially if you've adjusted your anti-roll bars and suspension, it will actually change. So if you've made big changes, then always go back to your camper settings and just double check what you have done still meets what I'm about to show you now. So let's just drop these down here. Now my telemetry is set up on the left button, yours may be the same or different, but we basically want either this screen or, need to work it out, this screen here. Now if you look, we're going to be going clockwise around the roundabout, so if you look at the front right and rear left, the camber, when we're turning, we want it to flash between a positive and a negative, so we want that negative symbol to disappear as we're turning. So I'm going to gradually speed up, and then I'm actually going to force the car into a bit of understeer where the front starts pushing, and I want both the front and the rear to flash. Now we've actually got, if you keep an eye on that, I'll do it again, the front goes over quite nicely and the back is gradually getting just there, so we need to make a very minor adjustment. I mean, I'm going to be taking 0.1 out front and back. It's actually quite a low setting. Most cars are around about 1.1, 0.7. So again, I'm going to keep turning, just double check what we've done. Now they're both flashing, we're all good to go. Now the other window we were just in here, what you want to do is get the tyres nice and warm. In the winter it's not too great, this screen, unless you've got something like street tyres where it's easy to warm up, but these are race tyres, they're going to take quite a lot. But what you want to do is go on a nice twisty, give it a thoroughly good run, and then you want to make sure that the inner and outer are no more than 10 degrees of each other. So if I force this car to hit up the front wheels or the rear, you don't want to slide because it's really going to make no difference. You're going to try and force understeer on this, if anything. Not going to do it, but either way we're still within our 10 degrees front and back. This means that you have got the most contact patch with the floor. So that's that done. Now we're on to gearing. Now right next to a motorway, perfect spot. Let's warm them back tyres up. And then we're just basically going to rev it up, fit the clutch and see how many times we hit that red line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, in the second gear, catches gear. Way too much bounce on the red line in first gear. And take in mind, this is almost 800 horsepower. It is always going to bounce off that red line in first gear. So what we want to do, we just want to try and reduce that as much as we can. If anything, we'll want to catch grip in second gear. So we know, looking at this graph, that our second gear will catch grip. Now if we move our first all the way to our second, we are going to have a very long gear in, which we don't want. So I'm going to move it up to about halfway between where first and second was, and then I'm going to bring the rest of the gear in range of the power band. Second gear I will bring lower because we want to catch grip. So we'll bring that down to about 5,500. Maybe a little bit more, and then the rest of the gears we want to keep within our power band, and we'll just keep a nice smooth curve on those gears, and we'll go more into the tuning after that. So we're going to repeat this process a few times to make sure that we've got our gears where we want them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We could lengthen that a little bit more, but you know what, we caught grip in second. It wasn't too bad, it was half of what it originally was, so you know, I'm pretty happy with that. We'll keep that. Now what we want to do is make sure the rest of our gears fall within our power band. So let's give it some second. Third is just above 7,000. Fourth is 7,500. Fifth just below 8,000. That's where we're running out of torque. Sixth, we're still in our power band and we're still accelerating. Now this side of the motorway is actually the slower side. So if you want to tune for maximum speed, you actually want to be going the other way than the motorway. And sometimes you might need to lengthen out your sixth gear on the downside of the motorway, we'll call it, in order to make peak top speed. But right now I'm happy with this. We're doing about 217 uphill, 216. I'm pretty sure the way down will probably be in 230 as Dyno said, maybe a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. I'm not going to run through that. That is the explanation how to do gearing, and then just dabble with it from there. Now what we're going to do, we're going to go straight into the handling side of things. So we've got some nice bends up here. Read what the car is doing. Now first of all I look for anti-roll bar stuff, so I don't want to give it too much throttle because obviously this being 800 horses is going to overpower the back end, so you're not going to tune out driver error, you're just going to make the car do what we want it to do better than what it did standard. So we're going to hit some corners and we're going to keep an eye on what it does. Now if we come into a corner at a nice steady speed and then we introduce front wheels, a little bit of understeer, but we'd rather have understeer than oversteer. Another thing what we want to be keeping an eye out for, especially at higher speed, is that the back end is not trying to rotate on us, which it isn't. Again, a little bit of understeer, not a problem. You can always counteract that with a powerful car, a bit more throttle. Now, anti-roll bars, how do we know when to tune our anti-roll bars? Woo! That was unlucky. What we want to keep when we're on the road is when we bring the car left to right, does the car settle down nicely? Yes it does, it's not too bad. If your car is all over the gap and you're trying to struggle, trying to catch it, we're going to stiffen our anti-roll bars up. We'll show you how to do that in a minute. But so far so good, the car is actually pretty well set up on the base settings. We'll get into some tighter bends further up, let's see how it reacts. Now rebound, damping and bump stiffness is when we're going across slightly bumpy parts of the road and our wheel is extended into the hole. Now is it making our car skittish, like bouncing around? If so, we want to loosen that off a little bit more. We want to reduce the bump stiffness but still keep it within that 50 to 75% range. A couple of little bumps along here. And the tight bend. Actually feels pretty good. Okay, right, you know what, straight out of the box is actually pretty good. Gearing's good. Let's see what sixth gear is like down this straight here. That's actually quite an easy car to set up, so what I'll do is I'll explain some ways and tips of how to tune your car up. Back end out. So we haven't even had to tune our rear downforce right up. Now what you'll tend to find is if you put your downforce up maximum to the front and back, you'll probably find that your car actually understeers quite a lot because the back of the ground is pushing into the floor, lifting your front of the suspension up, meaning that you're light at the front end. So just keep that in mind. What I tend to do if I'm understeering, get into the tuning window and we'll go through, I'll run you through a few things. So if we are understeering, we try to do one thing at a time, not too much. If you make too much adjustments, you will lose yourself. Now, I tend to start with the anti-roll bars. Now, like I said, if your car is squirmy, if you like, it's not settling down nicely, I will do one circle at a time top and bottom, and that will stiffen your car up front and back. If we want to change the characteristics of how the chassis is handling, then we will differ the front and rear. So, I mean, if the car is understeering, what we want to do is actually reduce the front anti-roll bar down. And I tend to do one full circle or half a circle at a time, depending on how precise I want to be. But if the car was understeering, I would drop this car, because it's not really understeering, I would actually do it half of a circle. And then with our springs, the springs and the damping are what affects your car during the corner. The anti-roll bar is you're turning into the corner. The way the chassis is reacting to your steering, the springs and damping take over once you enter the corner. So we're slightly understeering through a corner. What I want to do is half a circle on the front springs, half a circle on the damping, and then we want to make sure that we're around about 50 to 75%. I'm going to knock that down the same as what I have at the top. Now that doesn't always coincide. You actually want to be a little bit less on the bump stiffness for some reason. But you can always redo your maths just to double check. Now that will reduce our oversteer. Obviously we can turn our aero up more on the front, but if we adjust this too much, we will start losing a lot of top speed, which we don't necessarily want. But you know, for the video, we'll do it to 90, one whole bump, or 89. Now, if your car is really understeering and you've made some adjustments, but if you start doing any more, then your car starts feeling loose, then what I would suggest to do is actually turn your rear downforce down towards speed. Now, what this will do, this will stop making the front of the car light and would allow the front end to dig in. Now, our car wasn't very tail happy, so we could actually lose a little bit of rear downforce. Now, this car, again, wasn't very tail happy, so don't really need to adjust the acceleration or deceleration on the diff. But if I was finding that the car was oversteering, where the back end wants to slide out on throttle input, then I would just reduce this down 5 or 10% at a time, and I would make sure that it's always half of whatever on deceleration of whatever the acceleration was. Now you can adjust your braking force through the telemetry. Now if you slam your brakes on and the front is diving, and if you look at the tyre pressure monitor and all of the weight is going to the front, you can actually reduce that by making the back end brake more, and it will keep the suspension level. For me, it doesn't make a huge difference. If I'm honest, I'm quite light on my brakes, so I tend to leave this at 50 on grip tuning, but drift tuning is slightly different. Right, we've gone through our aero, we've gone through our springs and our anti-roll bars. Now we know our alignment was good because we checked that on the telemetry. Now with your toe, if your car is not turning very nicely, as I said, you can add in some towing on the front and towing on the back. Now with a rear wheel drive car, if you do 0.2 and 0.2 for instance, the back end will now want to rotate. So what you would do is you'd start putting the toe in on the rear. This stabilizes the back end. Remember not to go too much more than 0.5. If you look at our top speed, it's actually fouled. I'll knock that to 0, and it's probably took quite a lot of top speed off. It was 231 roughly before. Let's see what it gives us. Yeah, 231. So if I was to do 1 out, 1 in, you'll see that it starts making a difference to our top speed. Not hugely at the moment, but when you start getting to the bigger numbers, it will start dropping. It will actually foul, like you see a minute ago. It's not to say your car won't hit top speed, but it is reducing top speed. So this car, again, it's not oversteering, not a problem. A little bit of understeering that we've taken out by our suspension tuning. And again, remember that your tyres, if you have made multiple adjustments and the back end of the car is not gripping or the front end is not gripping, then remember you can drop your tyre pressures down around about half a psi at a time until you get that to where you want. Now don't go too low, because what you will get is a simulation of where the edge of the tyre is twisting or distorting, and that will actually, you'll lose contact patch with the floor, and you can see that in your telemetry. Now quite happy with this setting. I think we're about to go back to the dark. If we are, I will pause the video and go back. I'll come back in the daytime. Yeah, what we'll do, we'll pause and then we'll come back in the daytime. Right, so back to somewhat of daytime again. My recording device doesn't like the night time, becomes far too dark. So what we'll do is we'll just double check our sixth gear. See how fast we can get on the far side. Hoping about 230. Now we have got some downforce on there, obviously that takes away from our top speed. Now, just a few tips whilst we're doing this. With your four-wheel drive cars and front-wheel drive cars, the tuning setup will work for both. Just remember, obviously, your diff settings will be different on a four-wheel drive car, and on a front-wheel drive car, without rear downforce, you'll probably find that the rear end really wants to come out when you come off the throttle. Again, we're not going to be able to tune out driver error, so you must make sure that you're driving correctly, that you're doing the right braking into the corner and accelerating out after the apex. But you will make your car so much nicer following what I've just showed you. Now, with four-wheel drive cars, if they're really powerful, you can drop down to 25 on the back, 40% on the rear, and if your car is tending to understeer, put the balance over to the rear. If you find that the four-wheel drive car is oversteering when the back end wants to come out too much, reduce your rear diff percentage and also start moving the balance towards the front, and you'll find that makes a huge difference to what you're doing. I've got my A86 has got like 1,300 horsepower. It's four-wheel drive, but I've actually set it up so it actually drives a bit like a rear-wheel drive car. Obviously, with that sort of power on the rear wheels, we're never going to pull away too fast. So I've made it four-wheel drive, but I wanted it to react like a rear-wheel drive car. So I believe I've got 20% split on the front. I've got 50-50 on the back. I've got it around about 78% over to the rear, meaning that the car accelerates real fast and it corners a bit like a rear-wheel drive car. But we've got the added benefit of having the front wheels helping grip up in the corners. I mean, that car is super fast, and if you look for my gamer tag URXP LDN, you can download any of my tunes and try them. Most of my cars, or say all of my cars, are set up for grip tuning via a steering wheel, unless it says otherwise, but they do have one type. They're either grip tune or drift tune. I don't do off-road tunes, although I am starting to get better at it, and I'm starting to try and teach myself how to do it. But what we'll do, we'll just test this new setup around the next few corners. That was my fault, too much throttle. And yeah, we'll get down to the beach front and go from there. See, the understeer has come out of the car now. Feels pretty good. Now we know the back end, you just see it twice, wants to come out on the throttle. So we could add a little bit more rear downforce or even soften up the rear damping a little bit, but I don't mind that, it's not uncontrollable. So the car's lovely and balanced. It's not moving around too much, it's quite forgiving. And don't forget people, we've got almost 800 horsepower in a nice tight little car, very light little car as well. It's capable of good top speed, it handles pretty well. Now you can put these settings to any of your cars and it will work. This is how I've been doing with my cars. What I tend to do is then put all my tuned cars into my favourite list, and that way I know where all of my good cars are. But if you like what you see today, please hit that subscribe button, it will really help the channel. This is only a small channel that I'm trying to grow. If you think anybody would benefit from this video, please share it to them. But anyway, I'll see you next time. You have a lovely day. Bye bye.